A chill hung in the air at Unique Custom Paint and Panel in Pooraka, Adelaide on November 21st, 2012. The workshop, usually filled with the sounds of hard work and the smell of oil, was all of a sudden a picture of pure horror, tools scattered and the silence broken only by the echo of gunfire and the hurried footsteps of masked men fleeing into the afternoon. Sadly for Jason De Ieso, a 33-year-old panel beater and soon-to-be father, he had been in the worst place at the right time and lay fatally wounded on the floor of his business premises. Jason was an innocent man with no gang ties, and yet he had been caught in the crossfire of a violent feud between rival bikie gangs. How did a hard-working tradesman become the tragic victim of Adelaide's escalating bikie wars? This is the story of a life stolen and a community left searching for answers. Jason was a devoted family man and respected business owner in Adelaide, running Unique Custom Paint and Panel, known for the professional service he provided to his clients. He was also known for his generosity and warmth. Jason was a beloved husband, son, and soon-to-be father. Whilst he wasn't directly involved in gang culture, he did operate an open-door policy. This meant he occasionally worked on bikes for members of the Finks motorcycle gang, something that would become a very significant detail as the story of this case unfolded. His family and the local police force repeatedly stressed that Jason was not involved in gang activities throughout the media frenzy surrounding his death. He was just a normal, hard-working tradesman trying to provide for his family for his unborn child. Adelaide was used to stories of gang-related violence around this time. The city was in the grip of an outbreak of gang violence that was as bad as it had ever been. A bitter feud raged between two of Australia's most notorious outlaw motorcycle clubs, the Hells Angels and the Finks. The rivalry between them had simmered for years, but it erupted into full-blown open warfare in 2012, transforming the city's northern and western suburbs into battlegrounds. Police reported more than 40 bikie-related incidents in South Australia in the year leading up to Jason's death, including at least a dozen shootings, multiple firebombings, and public brawls that left bystanders terrified and authorities scrambling to restore order. You might think that the violence took place in the shadows, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It often spilled onto suburban streets, with drive-by shootings targeting homes and businesses linked to either gang. In May 2012, a Finks clubhouse in Salisbury was firebombed, causing huge damage, even though there were miraculously no casualties. In August, a member of the Hells Angels was shot outside a gym in Seaton, part of a string of tit-for-tat attacks that left police warning the public to be vigilant. The general population was starting to look around, watching over their shoulders in those problem areas, which tells you all you need to know about how serious this problem was becoming. According to South Australia Police, there were at least 5 major arson attacks and 6 confirmed shootings tied directly to the bikie war in the 6 months leading up to Jason's murder. The night before Jason was killed, the feud reached a new level of intensity. A house in Pooraka, linked to the Alzwain brothers, well-known associates of the Hells Angels, was firebombed, with police describing it as a targeted and deliberate act of retaliation. Witnesses reported seeing flames engulfing the property in the early hours, with emergency services battling the blaze for hours. No one was injured, but the message was clear. The war between the Hells Angels and Finks was escalating, and no one connected to either side was safe. This was all part of a broader pattern of violence that had seen both gangs vying for control of lucrative criminal markets in South Australia, including drug trafficking, extortion, and illegal firearms. Police intelligence suggested that the Hells Angels, who had long dominated the region, were facing an aggressive challenge from the Finks, who were expanding their influence and recruiting new members at a rapid pace. By late 2012, authorities estimated there were more than 300 patched members of outlaw motorcycle gangs operating in Adelaide, with hundreds more associates and supporters operating behind the scenes. The firebombing of the Alzwain brothers' house was the spark that set off a deadly chain of events, fueled by a desire for revenge and a strict code of silence that would make later police investigations a nightmare. The Hells Angels moved quickly. Within hours, plans were set in motion that would lead a group of armed men to Jason's workshop, forever altering the lives of a loving family. The city, already on edge from months of gang warfare, was about to witness one of its most senseless and tragic acts of violence. November 21st, 2012 began like any other day for Jason in his corner of a quiet industrial suburb of Pooraka. Unique custom paint and panel, his pride and livelihood, was busy as it usually was. Jason, 33 at the time, was known for his attention to detail and warm, welcoming demeanour. He had no criminal record, no known enemies, and no direct ties to either side of the ongoing bikie war raging through the city. But that afternoon, at approximately 1:40 PM, Jason's workshop became the scene of one of South Australia's most shocking gangland murders. 9 men, later identified as associates and members of the Hells Angels, arrived at the workshop. This was no amateur attack. CCTV footage would later show them walking with real purpose across the car park, their faces obscured by hoodies and masks. 5 men were armed, 3 with sawn-off shotguns, 2 with pistols, and a further man carried a metal bar. The rest acted as lookouts and backup. They weren't going after Jason. They didn't even know who Jason was. Intelligence gathered later showed that the group was looking for a member of the Finks gang, the man who they thought was responsible for the firebombing of the Alzuane brothers' home the previous night. The Alzuanes were well known, respected and feared members of the Hells Angels, and the attack on their property was seen as a major trigger in the ongoing war. The men had received a tip that their intended target was at Jason's workshop. The tip-off wasn't wrong. The man had been there, but had just left a few minutes before the gang of 9 masked men arrived. Jason, completely unaware of the danger, was going about his daily business as usual. What happened next was described in court as an execution. 4 of the gunmen lined up at the entrance to the workshop, forming what prosecutors would later call a firing squad. Without warning, 3 of them opened fire. Witnesses later recalled the deafening noise, followed by absolute chaos. Jason, realizing the immediate threat, tried to escape. He turned and ran, but was struck in the head by a shotgun blast. He died instantly, collapsing onto the workshop floor. The attack lasted less than a minute, but it took just a single split-second moment for an innocent man to die in cold blood. The entire incident was captured on the workshop's CCTV system. The footage showed the attackers' military-like movements, their weapons raised, and their swift retreat after the shooting. One of the men's hoods slipped during the chaos, briefly revealing a distinctive scar and tattoo, details that would later become crucial in identifying the suspects. The group fled the scene in 2 vehicles, a white Mazda 2 and a white Nissan Pulsar. The Mazda was later found abandoned and burnt out in a nearby suburb, which was a common tactic used by organised crime groups to destroy forensic evidence. The Nissan Pulsar was later traced to a known associate of the Hells Angels. Within minutes, emergency services arrived, but there was nothing they could do for Jason. He was already gone. He was pronounced dead at the scene, leaving his family absolutely devastated. His wife, who was pregnant with their first child, and his parents, who had lost their only son, had to deal with the news that Jason had died in a senseless act of violence. The community was also left in shock. It was a tragic case of someone caught in the crossfire of a criminal war he had no stake in. Media coverage in the aftermath was intense, with headlines condemning the violence and criticising the inability of authorities to curb the escalating conflict. In the days that followed, grief gave way to public mourning. Jason's funeral at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Newton drew hundreds of mourners from across Adelaide. The church overflowed with family, friends and members of the community. Notably absent were any bikie gang members, a reflection of both the family's wishes and the tense atmosphere surrounding the ongoing gang war. Police maintained a discreet but watchful presence, determined to prevent any further violence from erupting at such a sensitive event. Jason's family issued a heartfelt public statement, describing him as a loving husband, devoted son, and brother to all. They continued to remind all that his only connection to bikies was professional. He had worked on vehicles for anyone who came to his shop, regardless of their background. Jason was an innocent man, his family said. He was taken from us because of a conflict he had no part in. The police didn't take this event lightly either. South Australia Police quickly launched one of the largest investigations in the state's history, codenamed Task Force Shade. Over 100 detectives and forensic specialists were assigned to the case. In the days following the murder, police conducted more than 60 raids across Adelaide, targeting properties linked to both the Hells Angels and the Finks. Dozens of firearms, drugs and other illegal equipment were seized, and several suspects were arrested on unrelated charges as the authorities tried to get a grip on this escalating war before it got completely out of control, so that Jason's life was not lost in vain. Recognizing the gravity of the crime and its connection to the escalating bikie war, police quickly released CCTV footage of the attack, showing the chilling approach and coordinated actions of the masked gunman. The footage, which captured 4 men forming a firing squad at the entrance of Jason's workshop, was broadcast widely in an urgent appeal for public assistance. A $500,000 reward was offered for information leading to the conviction of his killers. To put it into context, it was the largest reward in South Australian history at that time. This unprecedented sum reflected both the seriousness of the case and the difficulty police anticipated in persuading witnesses to come forward, given the notorious bikie code of silence and the ever-present fear of violent retribution. Outlaw motorcycle gangs like the Hells Angels and Finks are known for their strict codes of loyalty and secrecy. Witnesses, both inside and outside the gangs, were reluctant to cooperate, fearing for their own safety and that of their families. Even with substantial evidence, including ballistic analysis, witness statements, and the crucial CCTV footage, it was hard to push forward without statements from witnesses. Detectives had information about possible suspects almost immediately, but gathering enough admissible evidence to secure convictions was another matter entirely. Through painstaking detective work, police finally identified the 9 men, all believed to be members, prospects, or close associates of the Hells Angels North crew. The suspects were in place. Among them were the Alzawan brothers, Musa, Hussein and Mohammed, who had been the victims of the provoking firebomb attack on their home. They were all central figures in the gang's Northern Adelaide operations. Musa Alzawan, who was notably a former Olympic boxing hopeful, was just 19 years old at the time and would later be identified as the man who fired the fatal shot. Other key suspects included Daniel Mark Jolly, Ross William Montgomery, Kyle Lloyd Pride and Nicholas Sianis. All were either patched members or closely linked to Hells Angels criminal activities. The group's actions on the day of the murder were described as a joint enterprise. It was a meticulously planned retaliation attack for the firebombing of the Alzawan family home the night before, a crime believed to have been orchestrated by their rivals, the Finks. On the day of the murder, the group first targeted a tattoo parlour operated by a senior Finks member, causing significant property damage and assaulting those present. Failing to find their intended target, they moved onto Jason's workshop, acting on a tip that a Finks member was there. The detailed plan included the men deactivating their mobile phones, distributing weapons amongst the group, and arranging for the destruction of evidence, including burning out the getaway Mazda and rebirthing the Nissan Pulsar they used to flee the scene. The major breakthrough came when a witness, known as Witness 6, finally came forward. They provided detailed testimony about the group's preparations and movements. This witness described how weapons and disguises were shared out, and later recounted the disposal of the murder weapons. The defense argued this testimony was unreliable and perhaps part of a deal with the authorities. Regardless, the case finally went to trial more than a decade after Jason's death. The 5-month Supreme Court trial was one of the longest and most complex in South Australia's history. In October 2023, 7 men, including all 3 Alzawan brothers, were found guilty of Jason's murder, with the jury accepting the prosecution's argument that all were equally culpable under joint enterprise law. One suspect, Saywan Moradi, faced a retrial after the jury could not reach a verdict, and a 9th suspect had died before the trial started. The verdicts and sentences finally gave the family some sort of closure, but the toll of a 10-year wait for justice and an extensive trial was telling. The jurors themselves were exempted from future jury service simply due to how complicated and emotionally draining the case had been. This has to go down as one of the most shocking moments of an already dark period in Adelaide's history. Two rival bikie gangs had already filled the streets of the city with fear as tensions between the two groups boiled over in an escalating series of violent brawls, arson attacks and murders that ripped through Adelaide, with the authorities finding it almost impossible to rein things in. Then, a completely innocent man, a family man, a hard-working man, was caught in the crossfire. Unlucky in the greatest sense, his business was the site of a planned revenge attack. Only, the target wasn't where the attackers thought he would be, leading to the death of a man who was about to become a father for the first time. As tragic as it was, this death paved the way for the South Australian police to finally crack down on the Hells Angels and Finks in the pursuit of justice. Sadly, it took 10 years for Jason's family to get the justice they deserved, but at least they finally had the closure they had been waiting for. This brings us to the end of the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like this video. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Till next time, take care.